Hello, fancy folks. Today we're continuing our interview series by talking with Dr. Jessica Steier from the Unbiased Science universe. They have a podcast and they also publish super helpful health facts on almost every social media platform. The podcast is devoted to objective, critical appraisal of available evidence on science and health-related topics relative to people's daily lives. The goal of the podcast is to dispel misinformation and misconceptions across an array of science and public health topics, everything from vaccines to GMOs to fad diets. With the emergence of COVID-19, the podcast initially dedicated most episodes to distilling the latest research on the ongoing pandemic in real time, but they have evolved over time and expanded and now tackle all of the pertinent health topics of the day. Dr. Steier is a co-founder and CDO of Vital Statistics Consulting. She is a public health scientist and health services researcher, and she served as a senior health policy consultant at the Lewin Group, working primarily on large state and federal grants. And prior to that, she served as the inaugural research coordinator of Hofstra University's Department of Physician Assistant Studies, where she designed the master's degree curriculum, conducted research with clinicians and healthcare delivery organizations to inform evidence-based change and quality improvements. She received her master's in public health from SUNY and her doctorate in public health from CUNY, all New York-based. True New York girl.
That's right.
Welcome. I'm so excited that this is happening. I have been a fan of your output from the get-go. Like I love the memes. I love the explanations. I love that there's people out there discussing things in ways that help everyone digest all of the information that you can have access to now, which is a lot.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And I know we had some scheduling snafus, but we're here and we're doing it. So I can't wait.
So I love to hear how people got first interested in science. Was it a lifelong love or something you discovered later in life?
Yeah, it's so funny. My career trajectory kind of looked like a roller coaster. I knew I always gravitated towards healthcare in general. It's just part of my core personality. I like helping people. And then I watched my father struggle with, he had advanced COPD. He struggled with that for over a decade. So watching him deal with that, navigate the healthcare system, the fear that he experienced, the different, treatments that he went through, and then later in his life being diagnosed with cancer, just the whole thing really, I was very drawn to healthcare. But truth be told, I hated my coursework in chemistry and biology. That part of it really didn't appeal to me. It was more of the applied real world healthcare stuff. And then I also had a real love for mathematics and statistics. And so it took me a while to figure out how those different topics and skill sets sort of combined. And I found out about this field of public health, which is just that. It's a combination. And so I stumbled into this world of applied public health, data science, epidemiology, biostatistics, and using data to understand the impact of different health policies and programs and how to help people, improve the quality and quantity of their lives. So that's how I stumbled into public health science. And I started in, really, it was chronic disease, that world, in particular, tobacco control, given my father's emphysema. He was a lifelong smoker, which undoubtedly contributed to his emphysema. So sort of a combination of data science, math, and healthcare. I'm a mishmash.
A lot of scientists are. And as somebody who really loves the biology, I'm very glad that people like you are out there, because I did not like the math. I was like, no, thank you.
Although I will say it might have had something to do with the fact that I think it was organic chemistry. It was at 8 a.m. on Friday mornings. And it was, Thursday night was the big going out night. So I don't think that helped me, to cultivate my love. But no. It's very important that there are people with both of our respective areas of interest.
I had nucleotide sequence analysis at 8 a.m. on Fridays.
No, thank you. So, if it was calculus, sign me up. Now you're speaking my language.
Calculus and I barely coexisted long enough for me to get past it.
That's so funny.
So you have a podcast and you have, I would call it a social media empire. You're on all of the things.
Oh my gosh, I love you.
Um, which I think is how you should describe yourself going forward.
Done. Done.
Um,
And you also said Unbiased Science Universe. I'm
yes.
taking note of that.
Well,
I'm using
for
that.
me, it is a universe, right? So it's across all these platforms. And it's not just the podcast, right? You're really trying to leverage where people are to reach them so they can consume this information, right? So I know that COVID-19 was sort of the kickoff for the podcast, but can you kind of describe where you are now and what your goals are and like who's your audience? Who are you trying to talk to?
Love this question. And as you said, I'm this public health cheerleader. I always have been. And then as you sort of described my background, I've worn a bunch of different hats. I was in clinical academia for a while and I love teaching. And it was actually very cool teaching clinicians because they're clinicians, right? And so they don't usually think about the research side of things, the public health, the data science of it all. But I got them interested. I got them interested in that world. So I was like, maybe there is something here, reaching folks who don't necessarily have an interest in these topics. I liked that challenge. So then COVID happened. Obviously, people had a lot of questions. We all read the same terrifying headlines. The whole world halted. And I saw that, my family, my friends were reaching out to me. What the heck is going on? Help me make sense of this all. And that's really the impetus. That's what started Unbiased. I really originally thought it was just going to be my mom and her friends tuning in. But it grew. It grew very quickly. We had a couple of posts that went viral. I think there was one about masking that really took off because folks had questions about different quality of masks and how well they protected us and all that good stuff. And then obviously we all know things have thankfully calmed down a bit and we're out of that really acute stage of the pandemic. And it was obvious that people had questions about other public health topics and science topics. There was a real thirst for the best available evidence. TikTok has really set fire to the spread of misinformation, unfortunately. I always say social media is such a double-edged sword. It's this amazing way for us to get out good information, but unfortunately we know that the bad information travels even faster, especially because it's very clickbaity. It's delivered in a way that is, intended to incite a strong emotional response, and it does. Yeah. So it's evolved into much more than just COVID and COVID vaccines, although we do continue to tackle those topics. You mentioned some, but there are lots of questions about food and diet and ingredients. I don't know, all kinds of things. So I think now it's just this hub for sort of assessing the quality of evidence on topics and presenting where we stand in our current knowledge base and scientific consensus. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop rambling, sorry. To your point, I love meeting people where they are. And when I'm asked to describe my audience, it's tough because it's almost like I have two very distinct audiences. I have those who already have a higher scientific literacy and they crave the detail. They want more of that. And then I have the folks who don't really have a background in science and who are actually skeptical of science and the medical establishment. And those are the folks that I personally am most excited to reach. I grew up in South Brooklyn in an area where it was an interesting mixed bag, but there were a lot of folks who, like I said, didn't have that advanced education. My father didn't have any higher education. He was a self-described streety guy. He was a lifelong smoker. Like I said, I don't care what they tell me, about cigarettes and stuff. Like he represents sort of that dream audience for me. Like, how can I get through? How can I present the science in a way that will be interesting and palatable for folks who aren't drawn to that? So two sort of distinct audiences. And it's cool to see like the different types of messaging that will resonate with different audiences. Sorry, one final thing I'll say is that you mentioned that we are on different platforms. And I never thought of this when we first started in 2020, but the different platforms really reach different audiences. Like the folks who will tune into a science podcast are very different than the folks who are on Facebook, different demographics, different preferences in terms of the ways that they like to digest information.
Yeah.
And so it's been a real like learning experience because I'm a public health scientist. I don't have any formal training in communication. And so it's like a science and an art. It's a real skill.
Do you remember the first time you got the "you need to do more research" comment on one of your posts? I remember the first time and I was like, oh, honey child, no, we're not going to continue.
Oh, honey child is right. That was my exact. I don't remember the first time, but there have been so many instances of that. It's calmed down a little bit, but in that beginning, especially with the vaccines, do your research. Honey child, what do you think I do for a living?
So, what luxury item did you pick to talk about and why?
I feel so bougie. I call it my bougie and unnecessary item.
This is the bougie podcast. We are a bougie science podcast. Like this is the whole point. So you're in good company.
I'm with my people.
Yes.
All right. My electric towel warmer. This
love it.
Thing gets me through the winter, and it's we're in fall now. The weather's dropping. I'm in New England, so things are getting a little crisp. And I'm telling you, that's the best money I ever spent.
I don't understand how this is not a thing in the US because every household in Europe has a towel warmer. Even in Greece, where it doesn't get that cold, they have towel warmers in all the bathrooms.
Really?
Yeah. Americans are missing out.
Americans are okay. We're missing out on towel warmers and bidets, but that's a whole other.
Yeah, that's a different.
That's a whole. Yeah, it's a whole different conversation.
In Greece, they're connected to the plumbing in the house. This is part of. Like you turn the hot water on and the hot water goes into your towel warmer.
Okay, because there are two main types of towel warmers. There's the one that you're describing where it's the, water heater versus what I have, because it's not a thing here. It's not connected to plumbing or anything, which is just an electric towel warmer. But yeah, this should be mandatory, especially in the Northeast or places where
you like something warm because it feels like a hug or something like that. But are there any actual benefits to being warmer? That was the first question that popped into my head when you picked this topic.
You were asking me about the benefits of being warm.
Yeah. But so
okay.
I saw where it can increase the circulation and actually speed a healing process. And
really?
So this is mediated through heat sensitive calcium channels. And so what that does is it increases the intracellular calcium. And that increases the action potential, right? Because everything in your body is really about osmosis and creating these action potentials by differing amounts of ions at either side of the membrane. Increased action potential increases the stimulation of sensory nerves that leads to the perception of heat in your brain. So it's like this.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. And these channels are part of what are called the TRPV receptor family. And once they're activated, they inhibit the activity of the purine-based pain receptors. So your brain gets a signal that it's warm, that your body's warm, like, oh, warm. But then it's also at the same time counteracting these pain receptors to dial down the pain that you're feeling.
That is so interesting. See, I didn't even think about that. I was focused more when I was doing my little research on this, on how it affects mood, because I am someone who has like a little seasonal affective disorder. And when it gets cold, I get a little, it affects my mood. I'm more likely to be depressed. But that's so interesting.
Right. And these same family receptors also increase blood flow in response to the heat. So the initial response to the heat is mediated through sensory nerves that release the substance P and calcitonin G related peptide to increase circulation. So after a minute, nitric oxide is produced in the vascular endothelial cells and responsible for sustained response to the circulation to the heat. So basically, you're increasing the blood flow to the place where the heat is. And so these same receptors can also be activated by vanilla and menthol. So hot shower with like a eucalyptus kind of scent in there,
Oh,
Talking like,
spa vibes, bougie
yes,
spa vibes.
bougie spa vibes.
Yes.
But there's a reason why
Wait,
people like bougie spa vibes.
yes. Wait, and also I seem to recall, and I can't believe so when I had to have two C-sections when I had my kids. I had an infection and it was a whole
Oh,
thing. But anyway, I remember now, I'm thinking back, I was on some pain meds, so it's a little fuzzy for me, but I believe they were recommending heat and hot compresses to put on the actual incision. And I wonder if I mean, it sounds like it's related to what you're describing here.
yeah.
Interesting. So can I jump in? So I was looking, like I said, I was focused on mood and the psychology of it. And so here, let me read here. So it says that exposure to warm temperature stimuli that aren't painfully or unpleasantly hot, obviously, can elevate mood. The key physiological mechanisms, I guess, are not 100% certain, but the thinking is that the warming of the skin increases electrical signals in sensory neurons, and these neurons relay signals to the spinal cord, and neurons in the spinal cord then pass the signals along to the brain. And the result is activation of brain areas that process pleasant stimulation, such as here we go, this is not my area of expertise, medial orbitofrontal cortex.
Sure.
And activity in this part of the brain, I guess it's related to depression. And so it's increased by warm stimulation in a way that's correlated with perceived pleasantness.
Nice.
So there you have it. There is real biology and chemistry here.
There is. And so a study in 2013 in the Journal of Clinical Medicine Research had 100 subjects do squats for 15 minutes. And then heat and moist heat were applied either directly after or 24 hours after the exercise. And they were looking at strength, muscle soreness, tissue resistance, and force to passively move the knee for before and then 3 days after the exercise. And the greatest pain reduction was with immediate application of moist heat. So apparently dry heat had a similar but lesser effect. The immediate application of both types of heat preserved quadricep muscle strength and activity. They don't know why.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So it's the dry heat you said had the better effect?
The moist heat has the most effect on
Oh, I see.
like preserving the muscle strength. Which is weird because like you see these athletes doing the like cold plunges and stuff, and I'm like,
yes,
maybe they should be doing heat.
Okay, I mean I have a lot to say, but the cold plunge, people are paying thousands of dollars to just be uncomfortable for, honestly, I don't really like there's no overwhelming evidence that this is doing what people claim it does.
Yeah.
And I know the American Heart Association actually has a lot to say about it because it can actually like really shock your system and lead to cardiovascular issues. But that's a conversation for another time.
My dad used to do the polar bear plunges for the Special Olympics fundraisers where you jump in New England, Long Island Sound in January.
Yes, we had that too. I grew up in South Brooklyn and we had the polar bear plunge in Coney Island, and there were always ambulances on standby constantly.
So what else did you find? Towel warmers.
Okay, first of all, I'm embarrassed. I have to admit to you. So this is now the 10th time I'm mentioning I'm from South Brooklyn, but we use the word, and this is an incorrect pronunciation, but we say radiator instead of radiator. Do you know this? My husband, who's from California, he makes fun of me. You know, you've heard this.
I did my mom.
Okay, so you've heard this. It's embarrassing. So as I read this, I might weave in and out of radiator. I recognize it's incorrect, just to your listeners. Okay. So I found there was an interesting history of the towel warmer. So what you're saying, this was a thing in Europe long before it came here to America. And it stemmed from the invention of the radiator, which was apparently, according to what I read, invented in St. Petersburg, Russia in the mid 1800s. I found 1855, and who knows when exactly. And so it forms part of a central heating system whereby, as you described, a boiler heats water, which is then pumped through a series of pipes in a home to heat a room. And the radiator would be placed in a room in order to provide more heat in that room. And then as bathrooms were heated in this fashion, people were putting their towels or their articles of clothing on top to dry them or just to have them ready for, whenever they were coming out of the bathroom. And that's really what started this idea of towel warming. And then I guess in the 1920s, we saw the birth of the cast iron water heated towel warmer, which was commonly referred to as a bath radiator. And then towel warmers are also referred to as heated towel rails, heated towel bars. And I guess in the UK, there's a word that they call them drying racks. So this is a thing. And like we discussed, I can't believe it's not more of a thing here in the States.
It boggles my mind. Like my husband's already like, if we ever build our own house, he's like that's one of the like radiant floor heat and that are
essentials, bougie essentials.
Bougie essentials. But also just, at least in the case of radiant floor heat, is actually a rather efficient way to heat your house because your feet feel warm most of the time. The rest of you feels warm. I don't know if that's scientific or not, but
there's got to be some science that, my hands and feet in the winter constantly numb. I'm freezing. Yeah, I wish we had that radiant floor heat. That's such a game changer. But I think it's kind of expensive, right? Isn't it pretty expensive? I don't know.
Yeah. On his own. So he's basically been like, just let me know, we'll install it. And I'm like,
okay, take him up on that.
Yeah. So did you have a most interesting tidbit about the towel warmers?
What did I think was most interesting? I mean, what you were sharing, I actually think was more interesting than anything that I came across, the real biology of it all. And how, what were you saying, it could actually aid in wound healing? And so I'm just thinking, I'll just wrap myself up in a warm towel whenever I have any issues.
Electric blankets, they're amazing.
Yes, aside from the fire hazard, that is my go-to when I'm not feeling well. Yeah. Just wrap yourself up. Oh, nothing better. It's like you're back in the womb.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I really liked the history. I mean, it sort of makes sense that the radiators came from Russia, but when you think
yes.
But that was really cool. I have a final question that I'd like to ask everybody. Do you have a favorite scientist?
The person who comes to mind whenever I'm asked this question is John Snow. He's seen as, one of the fathers of epidemiology. He was a physician in England in, I guess, the 1800s. Mm-hmm. He did a lot of things. He was very involved in early anesthesiology research. He did a lot of work around the application of chloroform, actually during childbirth, to try to help with pain during labor. So really, really cool stuff there around pain management and, like I said, anesthesiology. And his work, he was around before we understood germ theory. He was around when we believed in the miasma theory, or that it was, foul air and emanations that were causing disease, which was actually really interesting because that concept did lead to some great sanitation laws and changes, but they got the actual cause wrong, right? They thought it was just the foul air. And they, like we said, they didn't really understand germ theory. But no, he was great. He developed one of the first real epidemiological maps. He mapped cholera on Broad Street in London. He was able to trace it back to this one water pump. It was controversial. People were dismissing what he was saying, but he mapped it out. He showed the proximity to this water pump. He actually did some really cool biostatistics to show the rate of death in the proximity to this pump versus other water pumps. And it turned out that it was a child who, I believe, died from cholera. They had his diaper it was leaking into this water source. I know, just the idea of it all. Talk about foul air. I mean, the whole thing is so gross. I don't know, his maps, the John Snow cholera maps, like I just remember studying that and thinking, oh my gosh, this is really one of the first disease mapping exercises. And it combined all the things that I love: healthcare, epidemiology, and biostatistics. So he stands out to me. He died in his mid-40s prematurely. I mean, he was pretty young, even for the time. And the thinking was that it likely had to do with a lot of his research, specifically around chloroform. I mean, he was constantly exposed to those things. So just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, I just remember, it's probably an apocryphal story, but the story of him pulling the handle off the well pump there to get people to stop.
Yes. I remember
that from some of my classes. And who knows if he actually did it, but there's this like lore around him that he was so
Exactly.
frustrated that people were still using this water, and he just went and removed the handle from it.
Well, and it's so funny that you say that, because I always think, I'm talking about this guy, who knows what he was like, some eccentricities. He abstained from all drinking. Then he was like a vegetarian, and he went to veganism. Like not that makes someone eccentric, but he had some interesting qualities, and he was quite outspoken, and who knows what he was actually like as a human being. But a lot of his work really contributed to the field of epidemiology.
No, absolutely. I love. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast and discussing your favorite luxury item with us. It's been a joy, and people can find you and your work everywhere on all of the social media platforms at Unbiased Science. Check them out, share them broadly. They're amazing sources of information. And actually, I would say conversation starters too. Way to start conversations with people in your life that might be hesitant about certain things, one way or the other.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation.
If you learned something new, please pass it on to a friend by sharing the podcast. And don't forget to click that subscription button. Nothing is more satisfying than a good click. LuxeSci Podcast is an Erevna Media production, produced by me, Dr. Lex. Audio engineer is Dr. Dimos, and our theme music is Harlequin Mood by Burdy. You can find us all over social media at LuxeSci Pod. Feel free to drop us a line. We always love to hear from you. Until next time.